Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Film Etc., the only movie review podcast you need in life. My name is Mike Webb. I'll be your host, and it's been a little bit since I last recorded an episode to you guys. As you can call from last week, I was on vacation by the time last week's episode came out. I went up to the great state of Washington. I had an uncle and aunt live there who I haven't seen in quite some time. I haven't been to the state of Washington in over a decade, but I went with my family and we all had a blast. We went up to the coast, we went to the shore, and it was a really interesting, fun time. We had a nice 4th of July barbecue there, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. This is the podcast show where I review the new releases of the week and grade them on a scale from 0 to 10, my apologies, based upon my personal opinion alone. This week, we are reviewing the much delayed and highly anticipated latest entry in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or MCU for short, but it is finally here. We are going to talk about Black Widow. But I am also catching up on movies that came out last week, including the music documentary Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, as well as the sci-fi action film The Tomorr War starring Chris Pratt, and the new horror comedy film Werewolves Within, which is somehow based on a video game. But enough about me. Let's get into the reviews this week. In case you guys are new to the show or you just need a little bit of a refresher, I am autistic, so you may hear my wording get jumbled up here and there, so I hope you all forgive me. So without further ado, let's get started. Black Widow is directed by Kate Shortland and is the 24th feature film entry in the ongoing Marvel Cinematic Universe. Scarlett Johansson returns as Natasha Romanoff / Black Widow in this action-packed spy thriller set between the events of Captain America Civil War and Avengers Infinity War. In this film, she confronts the darker parts of her ledger when a dangerous conspiracy with ties to her past arises. Pursued by a force that will stop at nothing to bring her down, Natasha must deal with her history as a spy and the broken relationships left in her wake long before she became an Avenger. The film also stars Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova, David Harbour as Red Guardian, O.T. Fagbenley, Olga Kurylenko, William Hurt, Ray Winstone, and Rachel Weisz. I'm a sucker for the MCU movies in general. They're just so much fun to watch. There's only a few of their movies that have been completely forgettable. I would say Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor 2, and Captain Marvel. And this is the second female-led MCU movie, and I will say this, it is already better. It's 100 times better than Captain Marvel, in my personal opinion. Scarlett Johansson is wonderful once again playing Black Widow. We see her going off the grid. This immediately picks up right after the events of Civil War, where she has to go off the grid. She relies on her friend, this black guy played by O.T. Fagbenley. As I mentioned, Johansson is wonderful, but I think both Florence Pugh and David Harbour steal the entire show. But Florence Pugh, especially as Yelena Belova, she acts like that she thinks her sister is much better at everything, and she has this commentary, this quip where she just does the most opposite way of what she thinks of what Natasha is doing, and it's hilarious throughout. David Harbour also has some funny clips as well. The film has very good directing from Kate Shortland. It's a nice score by Lauren Balfe, who also did Mission Impossible Fallout. Incredible action sequences. There are a couple handheld action sequences, but they're not the ones where you would just feel lost and just feel a little dizzy or something like that. No, you can totally feel where the action is going. You can see where the moves are hitting and stuff. And the story overall is pretty good, but it does have a nice twist towards the last third of the film. The character of Taskmaster is pretty good, but I won't give too much into detail on what the character is in general. However, I have two big qualms with this movie. One are the supporting characters get to carry the movie more than Johansson does. But I'm not saying that as a bad thing overall. We've seen Johansson play out. The other big qualm that I have is that there's a character that acts like a big baddie. This is Ray Winstone's character. He just feels like a complete throwaway character that is only there for expository. He just feels like he just wants to give a little bit of exposition or something like that. He just seems uninteresting overall. But I still think Black Widow is an enjoyable film to watch and is worth seeing on the big screen imaginable, even though it is available on Disney Plus as well for an additional fee. It's not as the same as seeing it in a movie theater in a crowd of people and have a wonderful time. But I digress. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Black Widow. And now let's get to the music documentary, Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, is a music documentary that acts as the directorial debut of Amir Thompson, who also goes by the name Questlove. He is the drummer and joint frontman of the band The Roots, where they've been serving as the in-house band for The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. This documentary examines the 1969 Harlem Cultural Festival, which was held at Mount Morris Park, now renamed Marcus Garvey Park, in Harlem, and lasted for 6 weeks. Despite having a large attendance and performers such as Stevie Wonder, Mahalia Jackson, Nina Simone, The Fifth Dimension, The Staple Singers, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and Sly and the Family Stone, the festival was seen as obscure in pop culture, something that the documentarians investigate. I really love this documentary. It makes you feel like you're watching a time capsule unfold in front of your eyes. It is very remarkable. This is a documentary that has been sitting in someone's basement for over 50 years, and to see it all play out is just extraordinary. This is the same summer that brought us both Woodstock and the Apollo 11 moon landing. And when you get to see people's reactions to think that they mostly think that this Harlem Cultural Festival event is more important than the Apollo 11 moon landing. Like someone is interviewed saying they're putting all this money so that we can go up to the moon, while they should have put black people giving food to black people instead, because they were like starving or something like that. Now, I am a white man who is in my mid-20s doing this movie podcast, and I have autism. But seeing this documentary unfold about black culture and what it means to be black and everything, and it's just incredible to look at. This is a part of black culture that you rarely know about. In fact, a lot of people don't know about it except for the people who have attended and the people who have performed. I said in the plot point that there are all these amazing performers, but you also have people like B.B. King and the Chambers Brothers, and both that band, and then I believe it's Sly and the Family Stone. Some of the audience, this was like an audience mostly made up of like 99% black people. And then they see like the drummers for Chambers Brothers and Sly and the Family Stone, and it was like, these people are white. What are they doing here? And they even brought shade to the Fifth Dimension, and they called them out thinking that they were a white band, but in actuality, they were black people from the Midwest. I can't remember if it was like Michigan or Minnesota, but, and don't get me wrong, I did shed some tears a couple times throughout this movie, because the performances, it could have been mistaken as like a concert film and you would probably still get the same experience out of it. But this movie made me cry a couple times, and I loved it. This is a festival that amassed 300,000 attendees, and it was free of charge to the public. The only thing that was kind of like a downside is that they need to eat. And so a bunch of people just like brought their home cooking with them, and they just like have attendees pay for it or something like that. You also see where each week there would be like a different theme. One week would be about blues, and then another week would be about gospel. And all those performances are just incredible. I wish we would get most of the performances in full. Again, this wouldn't work as a concert movie, and it would still have the same effect as I was watching it. And it's interesting to bring someone like Questlove, who found all this footage and decided to make a documentary about it. So I praise him for making this documentary. It is incredible. This movie did premiere virtually at Sundance earlier this year, and I was a little hesitant on whether or not I wanted to get a ticket for it, but it ended up selling out, and I ended up not watching that film, and I kind of regretted not doing that. And I was going to see this movie where I was vacationing in the state of Washington. And I was going to see it by myself while my parents would go see F9. But then I thought to myself, I'm here with my family. And I thought, why don't I let them see Fast 9 before I tell them about Summer of Soul? And now that I've seen Summer of Soul, I kind of now regret not having to see it in a movie theater. And it's a really, really impressive documentary. I cannot recommend this movie highly enough. It is a fun movie. It got an A+ on Cinema Score. At least that's what I am assumed to believe. But this movie is streaming on Hulu. I cannot find a single fault with this movie. If I had, maybe a little bit of editing choices, but I mentioned this last week that I was ranking the best and worst films of 2021. I think I may have found my new number one movie so far this year. So yeah, go check out Summer of Soul. It easily dethrones The Sparks Brothers as the best documentary of the year so far. Just go see it. I cannot highly recommend it enough. It's playing in select theaters and is streaming on Hulu, as I mentioned. Those are my thoughts on Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. And I failed to mention this. You get to see footage of where the revolution was being played at that time in the late 60s and how it was just becoming this like rising effect. So yeah, those are my thoughts. And now here are my thoughts on The Tomorrow War. The Tomorrow War is the live-action directorial debut of Chris McKay, who previously helmed the Lego Batman movie. In this film, the world is stunned when a group of time travelers arrive from the year 2051 to deliver an urgent message. 30 years in the future, mankind is losing a global war against a deadly alien species. The only hope for survival is for soldiers and civilians from the present to be transported to the future and join the fight. Among those recruited is high school teacher and family man Dan Forrester, played by Chris Pratt. Determined to save the world for his young daughter, Dan teams up with a brilliant scientist played by Yvonne Strahovski and his estranged father played by J.K. Simmons in a desperate quest to rewrite the fate of the planet. The film also stars Betty Gilpin, Sam Richardson, and Edwin Hodge. This movie feels like it's one of those movies I would have loved and liked as a preteen, just watch it for a summer over and over again. Or if it was a movie that came out around in the 90s, came out around the same time as Independence Day. But this movie came out I don't know, 15, 20 years too late. It feels like a bunch of science fiction movies that you've seen before, just dumbed it down. I mean, it has a clever premise, don't get me wrong, but the inevitability of comparing it to other movies just makes me feel like I've seen a lot of sci-fi movies like this before. It's I mentioned it has a little bit of Independence Day to it, but also elements of Edge of Tomorrow, which is a really good movie, by the way, with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. I don't care. I don't like how it's called Live, Die, Repeat on the home media. It's always been Edge of Tomorrow for me. That's how they promoted it in the trailers. That's how it came out when it was in theaters back in 2014. I still think Edge of Tomorrow is one of the best sci-fi action movies of the last 10 years. But anyway, The Tomorrow War. I think Chris Pratt is a very interesting choice to play the lead role, but I just found him very bland. He plays this middle-aged, buff, high school science teacher, but then he gets transported into it basically becomes kind of like this vortex where they're just I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's there's they're transforming into little bits of molecules being transported into the future and stuff. But Chris Pratt, he's doing his all. I just found him very bland in this. Yvonne Strahovski plays a character that I won't get into too much detail. I want this review to be entirely spoiler free, but when you find out what her character actually is, and I thought to myself, really? They're going to go with this? There's also Sam Richardson, who also appears in the movie Werewolves Within, which I will talk about next. He plays the one who's the odd one out. He is confused at first, and I just found him a little bit annoying, but then kind of grew to like him due to his comedic timing and stuff. Betty Gilpin, who plays Chris Pratt's wife, she was the best part of a movie that came out last year called The Hunt, where she and a bunch of other people are being killed for sport. And then it has this like political satire undertone. She kicks a lot of butt in that movie. She even kicks Hilary Swank's butt in that movie. But I won't get into too much detail. She is completely wasted here. She does absolutely nothing. She just plays the thankless wife who's trying to convince Chris Pratt not to go and all that stuff. It's always nice to see J.K. Simmons. I like him. Even if the movie is not good, the appearance of seeing J.K. Simmons is what makes this movie work. But, I mean, the acting overall is not terrible in my personal opinion. Throughout the movie, I just had this like blank expression on my face. I just felt, I wouldn't call it like bored, but I would say unenthusiastic overall. The story is the biggest problem that I have. It is lacking and it is lazy and dumb. There's a couple scenes that are full of exposition that is just being dumped on just for you to get a sense of empathy. It is heavily bloated with noticeable CGI, although I do think the creature design of these aliens look pretty cool though. But it's also 2 hours long, which it doesn't need to be. But just when you think the movie is over, there's still a lot of movie left. This movie cost $200 million to make. This movie was originally going to be released in theaters by Paramount before they were like, yeah, it's not going to do well at the theater. So we're just going to sell it to Amazon. And they did it with that. And they did it with the new Tom Clancy movie with Michael B. Jordan, which I have yet to watch. And anyway, it's a dumb and stupid sci-fi action movie, but I wouldn't say it's like completely terrible. I just found it to be entirely forgettable by the end. It just ends abruptly, but apparently it's doing very, very well on streaming. It's now streaming on Prime Video, and it was announced that they're getting a sequel to this movie. But anyway, I didn't bother with the Tomorrow War. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts. And now let's get into my review of Werewolves Within, which also stars Sam Richardson. Werewolves Within is a horror comedy directed by Josh Rubin and is based on the 2016 VR video game by Ubisoft. In this film, a proposed gas pipeline has created divisions within the small town of Beaverfield, and when a snowstorm traps its residents together inside the local inn, newly arrived forest ranger Finn, played by Sam Richardson, and postal worker Cecily, played by Milana Vaintrub, must try to keep the peace and uncover the truth behind a mysterious creature that has begun terrorizing the community. The film also stars a variety of characters played by George Basil, Sarah Burns, Michael Chernus, Catherine Curtin, Harvey Guillen, Rebecca Henderson, Cheyenne Jackson, Michaela Watkins, and Glenn Fleshler. Now, I have failed to mention this movie is also considered a mystery film, so it has this like whodunit plot. The game Werewolves Within is basically a version of the party game Werewolf or Mafia, or kind of like the board game Clue, where you try to figure out like who the murderer is and all that stuff. This movie was surprisingly funny, and this was like the type of like funny like humor that you would get in like a 90s movie, like one of those movies where it would just be like fun to watch. It feels like a movie that you would just turn your brain off, try not to take anything too serious. Sam Richardson is great, and I think he is better here than in the Tomorrow War. Milana Vaintrub, who you may know her as the AT&T girl on those AT&T commercials very recently. She is charming in this. The different characters that are sprinkled throughout, like you get this oil man who is like building this pipeline in, but it's dividing the people. Like there are people who are like up for it, and then there are people who are like against it. You have this gay couple that like work at this like little yoga studio. You have this couple who the wife is just like very like loves her dog, just like wants to open up a craft store. You also have the bed and breakfast inn run by its owner. And then you can also see like there's a sense of mystery, just like the disappearance of her husband and whatnot. You also have the hermit that lives out in the woods. He was a little bit interesting as well. It's one of those movies where it is a horror comedy, but there's like not a lot of horror. It's kind of like one of those like fun horror movies that most people would just probably like consider it as a throwaway gag or something like that. It does have some nice clips here and there, but it's not like a very interesting story. I mean, is there really a werewolf? Like, you're trying to question it throughout as you're watching the movie, and there is a werewolf. I'm just not going to say who it is, because when I figured out who it was, like, I like halfway through the film, I was like, I knew who was the werewolf from like a mile away. But it's not to say I didn't have fun with this movie. I enjoyably had a lot of fun with this movie. It's not a very long movie. It's like 95 minutes at least, but with the characters and all that stuff, they could like certainly die down or something. I failed to mention there's a scientist character who just like says the most ridiculous stuff, but it's so like ridiculously funny. You just can't help but laugh, and it's like, no, this can't possibly be true. I have to dig further into research. Like, all the acting and humor, it can like vary for you. You're either on board with this or you're not. And I was on board from, I don't know, like the first 10 minutes. It was a fun movie to watch overall. It's not great by all means, but I still had a fun time to watch. It reminded me a lot of the other horror comedy that came out a couple years ago called Ready or Not. But instead of being it as kind of like a murder mystery, this is more like a game of survival, because it's about a bride who is being married into this wealthy family who are like big into like games and stuff. But there's like one night when you're like inducted into the new family, you have to play, and the only game that is considered deadly is hide and seek. And so the bride has to like survive the night and try not to get killed. That is a fun movie, Ready or Not. I didn't get a lot of Ready or Not vibes from that. This movie plays out more like Knives Out than Ready or Not, but it's still an enjoyable horror comedy. I like the way it is. Again, Sam Richardson is wonderful playing this like nice guy who, well, he's trying to be like the nicest guy on earth, but he just like doubts himself for being too nice. Like, that is funny. But anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Werewolves Within. Now let's call this a day with our review roundup. For those of you who are new to the show or just need a little bit of refresher, I grade the movies on a scale from 0 to 10. If I give it somewhere between an 8 to a 10, I would say it's a worthy recommendation. Like, go see it. Somewhere between a 7 to a 7.9. It's still an enjoyable recommend, but not as high as I would give it. It's still a pretty good movie. Somewhere between a 6 to a 6.9. I was like, it's okay for the most part. Like, I mostly like some things, but I didn't like some things. A 5 to a 5.9 is just down average, like middle of the road and all that stuff. Anything below a 5, I would just not bother. So for the new releases this week, Werewolves Within, it gets a solid 7 out of 10. I mean, the story overall, it's a basic, simple whodunit with an oddball of quirky characters that just like give over the top performances. But the likes of both Sam Richardson and Milena Vaintrub, it is what helped keeps the movie afloat for me. So yeah, 7 out of 10 for Werewolves Within. It is currently playing in select theaters and is available on VOD, so check that out. The Tomorrow War, I'm probably going to give it a 4.5 out of 10. It's trying to deliver so much on an interesting premise, but I've seen most sci-fi movies where the story plays out in general, and I think it just falls flat. And so for that, I give it a 4.5 out of 10. It is currently streaming on Prime Video. Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised. I felt like I wasn't enthusiastic enough when I was reviewing it, but go watch this movie. It is by far one of the best movies I've seen all year. It's like life-changing. It is emotional. It is easily one of the best documentaries I've seen in my entire life, without a doubt. And for that, I give Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, a 9.7 out of 10. I think Questlove did a phenomenal job entering into the realm of filmmaking. And for Black Widow, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. A solid 8 out of 10. Very fun. Again, those qualms aside, I still think it is a nice little entry into the MCU. And I failed to mention this. There is a post-credit scene, but it's one where you have to watch everything MCU, not just the movies itself, but also the TV shows that are on Disney+. Do keep in mind on that. And so that wraps up the new releases of this week. And so let's wrap this up and call it a day. And thus concludes another episode of Film Etc. this week. I tried putting this episode out earlier, but I had some priorities with family and stuff. But other than that, thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode. Make sure you subscribe and follow this show on the many places that we stream, including Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave a 5-star review, tell your friends about it, spread the word of mouth. I'll be back next week with reviews of a new action movie that's on Netflix called Gunpowder Milkshake, and it stars Karen Gillan. But I'm excited to check that one out. You can follow the show on social media at FilmyTCcast on Instagram. I myself am at Real Mike Webb on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Thank you all so much for listening once again. Stay safe, and until next time, I will see you all at the cinema.